Welcome, everyone. I'm Brent Hamachek, the Vice President and Associate Publisher for Human Events Media Group. And I am here today in our studios from the sponsor of this event, the Freedom Chamber. If you're the owner of a privately held company and are looking for an association that represents your interests and is committed to helping you grow your bottom line, your minds, and your public policy influence, then you should become a member. So go to freedomchamber.net and join today. So it is a privilege for me to be joined today by Professor Alan Dershowitz. Welcome, Professor.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
He is here to discuss his new book, which I'm actually going to hold up to prove that I read. I mean, it's dog-eared, there's marks, there's the whole bit. But the new book is The Preventive State, The Challenge of Preventing Serious Harms While Preserving Essential Liberties. Every once in a while, without my reading glasses, I'll grab a word wrong. But Professor, it's a remarkable book. I want to just tell people that you really ought to read it. I mean, I literally wrote down all the things it covers. There's history, philosophy, ethics, logic, legal theory, contemporary issues, theology, and even culture and humor. Where else can you read a book where in contiguous sentences you quote George Bernard Shaw and then have a limerick? This shows a versatility and range of writing that's really quite remarkable. So thank you for writing the book, and thanks for being willing to come and discuss it. We've got a half hour. We could talk for hours about this book, but if we're going to spend hours, that means someone should just read it. So the benefit, I guess, of being host is I get to ask you about the things that I really found compelling and interesting. So first, do the elevator pitch. Tell people what this book is and why they should read it.
We are moving in a very, very dangerous way toward the preventive state for two reasons. Number one, we're facing more cataclysmic threats than ever before: nuclear threats, environmental threats, medical threats, terrorist threats, you name it. But we also have the ability, particularly through artificial intelligence and other new developments, to predict and prevent these horrible cataclysmic events from occurring. But we don't have a jurisprudence, and so we don't know what to do. For example, deportation, which we're now experiencing, is a preventive mechanism. It goes back to the Bible. It was called exile, but it's the same thing. You take a person and you get him out of the country so he can't endanger the king or the government. And we're doing the same thing under a different name. So that's obviously a form of prevention. The debate over whether Israel and the United States should attack Iran's nuclear reactor is a form of prevention. The British and the French failed to prevent Nazism from dominating Europe and killing 50 million people. That was a failure of prevention. We failed to prevent 9/11. We failed to prevent October 7th. And so how to strike what Benjamin Franklin talked about? He said, those who would give up substantial liberties for a little bit of security deserve neither. But in this book, I talk about how we should give up a little bit of liberty if we can secure an enormous amount of security. For example, everybody would agree that if we could have prevented 9/11 by arresting 10 people, 4 of whom we arrested mistakenly and 6 of whom we arrested correctly, that would be a proper trade-off. But if we had to arrest 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people, or what happened during the Japanese detention in 1942, 1943, we detained 110,000 people mistakenly, that's a cost-benefit analysis doesn't work. So in this book, which I've been working on for 60 years, I'm 86 years old now. I've been working on this book since I started teaching at Harvard Law School in 1964. I finally come up with what I think is a jurisprudence. I actually come down with specific numbers and better 10 guilty go free than 1 innocent to be wrongly confined. But is it better for 10 terrorist attacks to occur than for 1 innocent person to be wrongly detained? I deal with issues like torture. I deal with issues like waterboarding, issues like preventive war. And so I think this is my most important book. Of my, I've now written 57 books. This is my most important one. But the New York Times will not review it because I defended Donald Trump. Harvard Law School will not invite me to come back and speak about it because I defended Donald Trump. And so I need to make sure that people who have an objective, open mind, like the viewers of your show, have an opportunity to know what's in the book because they're not going to read about it in the left wing media.
Right. And the Donald Trump Harvard thing, if we have time at the end, I actually
Sure.
want to dip into that current event for a moment. I wanted to ask you sort of the why now. I had the sense in your book and even from your opening, it reminded me of a parent who's constantly telling their teenager to clean up their room. Teenager doesn't do it, and one day the parent says, enough, I'm going to do it myself. This felt like a project perhaps you were hoping others somewhere along your 86 years might pick up, but you do in this moment.
No, you're absolutely right. In a prior book, I invited people to come up with a jurisprudence of prevention, and nobody did. And for example, I just sent a copy of this book, The Preventive State, to every member of the Harvard Law School faculty, every single member of the law school faculty. I think it's one of the most important books ever produced by a faculty member at Harvard. I sent a copy to every single person, and a number of faculty members asked the law school to invite me to speak to the faculty about this book. No, it hasn't happened. They don't want to hear my voice because I defended Donald Trump. So I have been canceled and isolated,
Mhm.
but they can't stop me from writing. And so I decided finally at this old age
All
to
right.
finally do it myself and to write this book, to create the jurisprudence. I hope it will be the beginning of a debate, not the end of a debate, and other people will respond to it and criticize it. I'm happy for that, but I don't want to see it ignored. But there are a lot of people who would like to see it ignored, not because of the content of the book. I don't mention Donald Trump in the book. This is not a left-right book. This is a civil liberties, civil rights book. But
Right.
because I defended Donald Trump, there are people like at Harvard who don't want to hear my voice or read my books. It's pure McCarthyism.
Well, and the idea that it's not a right-left book is what I like so much about it. Why, by the way, that going way back, predating what you might call my conservative brethren, I've always been a fan of yours. We'll come to that at the end a little bit about defense attorneys and conservatives and that aversion, because I want to hear your thoughts on that. But in reading your book, you know, and I mentioned in the beginning, it includes all sorts of things, part of which is logic. And you have a very simple four-part decision matrix that is absolutely key and fundamental for people to understand what comes at the end. And I'm wondering if you might be willing to sort of walk through that matrix a little bit and give people a sense of that and the logic behind what you're doing here.
Oh, sure. If a weatherman predicts it's going to rain tomorrow and we end up carrying our umbrella and it doesn't rain, that's a false negative. If the weatherman predicts it's not going to rain and we don't bring our umbrella and it does rain, that's a mistake. And so I create this little box where there are basically four types of mistakes: false positive, false negatives, true positive, true negative. And it's important for us to value each one. If if the false positive produces the death of innocent people, that's terrible. But if the false negative produces the death of even more people, that's terrible. So to use the matrix, for example, to describe what didn't happen in 1935. If Winston Churchill had been Prime Minister of England in 1935, I think that he would have gone to war with England, with Germany, and France. By the way, Goebbels thought that, and Goebbels was shocked that England and France didn't go to war with Germany when they were violating the Versailles Treaty. So what happened is they didn't go to war because they failed to predict that 50 million people would die in the Holocaust and in the rest of Europe. And that was a horrible, horrible false negative. But if they had gone to war and had killed all the Nazis, but had also killed 10,000 innocent German people, people would blame them because we wouldn't know what they prevented. The same thing is true with Iran today. If Israel and the United States were to bomb Iran's nuclear reactor, we might kill some people. Actually, the number of people killed when Israel bombed the the French reactor in Iraq, one person was killed, a person who shouldn't have been there on a Sunday afternoon. And I think no people or very few people were killed when the Syrian reactor was destroyed. The same thing might be true with Iran, but let's assume 100 people would be killed. But who knows how many deaths would have been prevented had Iran not been able to develop a nuclear weapon, because if they don't develop it, they won't kill anybody. If they do develop it, tragically, then we'll know the way we knew in Nazi Germany. So these are the most excruciating state decisions that could possibly be made, and yet nobody has written a book with all the law books that come out every day about the most trivial subjects in the world. Nobody until today has written a book trying to create a jurisprudence that tells people how to analyze the most important decision that a society could possibly make, preventive war. Or take, for example, when we had COVID, should we have mandated vaccinations for people who didn't want to have vaccinations? We'd have to know how many people will die from infections caused by the vaccination, how many people would die if they weren't vaccinated. Does the vaccine help prevent the spread, or does it just help protect the person who gets it? These are all very complicated, difficult questions that we have to answer if we're going to come up with a jurisprudence of prevention. Right now, what we have is ad hoc decisions being made by judges who are the least qualified to make these important balancing decisions in our society. The legislature hasn't been involved in it, and for the most part, the executive hasn't, except on deportation, where maybe they've overreacted. And when you take visas away from every single person, then you're not targeting it. You're not having a jurisprudence. On the other hand, if you were to take visas away from students who are likely to come into the country and create disturbances and harass people, and if you can do it correctly, maybe that's a trade-off that's worth it. So that's the kind of balancing that we have to do and we're not doing.
It's interesting because embedded within that logic structure in the matrix you built, there's a sort of utilitarianism within it,
There is.
except you're not able to, with certainty, calculate the costs and benefits. And
Well,
so
it's
that
interesting.
creates the difficulty.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting. One of the people I cite in the book, of course, is Jeremy Bentham, and
yeah,
he comes up with
yes.
this fantastic example of what if there were a gang of people who tortured people, and you captured the head of the gang, and he could lead you to all the torturers. And by torturing him, one person, you could prevent the torturing of hundreds of other innocent people. Would you justify torture? And, Bentham says yes. Kant says no. International law says no, but they do it anyway. And so I do deal with something even as extreme as torture and capital punishment. And, every issue that the state is involved in, I cover in the preventive state. And these are life and death issues.
Right. Bentham and Kant, I told everyone there's philosophy in this book. It's
Yeah,
all there.
yeah.
One of the things that I think is worth sort of clarifying for people is you talk about the difference between criminal law and civil. And I think for most people, they think of civil law as I'm going to sue someone or they're suing me. And that's sort of the alpha and omega of their thought process. And I'm wondering if you could more completely define the distinction more holistically, maybe.
Okay, well, first of all, it's not a distinction, it's a continuum. So, on the one hand, we have pure civil. Dog bites man, man sues dog owner for $1,000. There's a jury trial, the state isn't involved, there's no thumb on the scale. Proof is by a preponderance of the evidence. On the other hand, on the other extreme, person is accused of murder, gets the death penalty if he's convicted. He gets every conceivable right that you can imagine. But in the middle, there are things like deportation, which are called civil, but they're very punitive in their effect. There are sexual psychopath laws, which lock people up for the rest of their life. They call it civil, but it's really, I mean, you're going to jail, and it is criminal-like. So I like to think of it as a continuum, and I like to look at it pragmatically. If your liberty is being deprived by the state, then all the procedural safeguards of crime have to apply. On the other hand, if it's purely between two individuals and the state has no interest, then you can have minimal safeguards and proof simply by a preponderance, which means 51%. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt, on the other hand, is more like 90%. So it's better 10 guilty go free than one innocent be wrongly confined.
So interesting. A reference. I enjoyed the references to Blackstone's ratio, the great English jurist. I only discovered within very recent time that Blackstone's ratio was actually made sometime before him by Increase Mather, who at Harvard in 1693 had said it wrote that it might be better to let 10 accused witches go free than to have one innocent witch be hung. So
Yeah, but he didn't apply it in practice. In
right,
practice, he was really permitting a lot of innocent because there were no guilty witches. There were no witches. Of course, the Bible talks about witches as well. And the Bible is what originally sets out the 10-to-1 ratio in the preventive state. I quote from the book of Genesis, where Abraham is arguing with God about the alleged sinners of Sodom, and finally they settle on 10. If there are 10 innocent people, then God will not destroy the city. But if there are only 9 or 8, he will destroy the city. And it turns out there weren't 10, so he destroyed the city.
He
And
destroyed the city.
that's where the origin of the 10-to-1 ratio really comes from, the book of Genesis.
So you mentioned being pragmatic a moment ago. It's a great segue to something I really wanted to ask you about. You do something in the book. I think the most compelling thing for me, I read this, and if there had been a microphone, I'd have dropped it. I suspect I dropped the book, but I thought it was interesting. And it is in this notion of rights. And I think you have a construct of where rights come from that swipes left on Locke and Aquinas, but may well have made William James proud from a pragmatic standpoint. Right. And I was wondering if you could walk through for people, because this is fascinating to me,
Sure.
your notion of where rights come from.
Okay, let's start where they don't come from. They don't come from God. God does not speak to human beings, and certainly if he does, he speaks in ways that everybody else interprets it. And, his books, the Bibles, the New Testament, the Old Testament, they don't deal with rights. So rights don't come from God. They don't come from kings. They don't come from parchment preachments. After all, the Declaration of Independence, talked about rights, and it was written on a desk built for Jefferson by a slave. So we have a lot of hypocrisy. Rights come from wrongs. Rights come from a recognition of wrongs. Human rights all developed after the Second World War, when we saw the horrors of the Holocaust and other killings. Women's rights came from a recognition of the wrong of sexism. The rights of African Americans directly comes from the abolition of slavery, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So I've created a whole theory of the origin of rights. It's called a secular theory because it doesn't deal with God. It's not a natural law theory. It's an empirical theory. It's a theory that says that human beings, unlike other creatures, have the ability to recognize their mistakes. And when we recognize our mistakes, we incorporate that recognition into rights to make sure we don't repeat those mistakes. And so that's one of, I think, one of the major contributions of the preventive state is to lay out a theory of rights. And, I deal with people like John Rawls and other great philosophers, and I accept some of their theories and reject others of their theories. And so that's why I think this is my most important book of my wife calls it the Heinz theory, because Heinz has 57 varieties of ketchup or whatever it is, and this is my 57th book. But hardly anybody knows anything about Heinz anymore, so I'm going to stop using that analogy. And my wife claims actually she didn't come up with it. She claims that I came up with it. So I always give her credit, even when it's not warranted, because she's come up with so many good ideas that I've accepted.
Well, I certainly understand the reference. We could even sing the old Heinz jingle from the commercial together if we want to off air. Uh, One of the things I wanted to talk about was the free speech chapter of the book. Free speech, of course, being such a big topic these days. It's been an issue for our country since the very first day. It seems to get a lot more attention over this past decade. Social media, the internet contributing to that. And what I thought was interesting is that in your book, you talk about Oliver Wendell Holmes and the whole you can't yell, fire in a crowded theater, or as Steve Martin used to say, never yell theater in a crowded firehouse. But one of the points I made in book I wrote last year is that there's nothing more dangerous to a free society than an axiom that isn't true.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a phrase that everyone knows. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. But they do what people often do with scripture when they cite it. That is, they ignore two forms of context. One is the words that were wrapped around it. The other is the time in which it was written. And those pieces of context are so important to a citation. I want you to explain to everyone, because I guarantee you that anybody watching this show knows the phrase, don't yell fire in a crowded theater, but they haven't thought much about it beyond then.
Right.
And I think the structure and the thought has led to a great deal of damage.
I agree.
But build on that if you would, please.
Yeah. In the preventive state, I analyze the Holmes statement that you cannot falsely shout fire in a crowded theater. It was fraudulent. It was not only dishonest, it was fraudulent. Let me tell you the facts of the case. The facts of the case was some socialist was handing out a leaflet telling people who were about to register for the First World War that they could claim conscientious objector status. What does that have to do with fire? That would be like somebody handing out a leaflet in front of a theater saying, don't go into the theater. It hasn't been recently inspected and maybe there'd be a fire. Shouting fire in the theater is not speech at all. It is a clang sound. It is pulling an alarm. Recently, we had an idiot congressman, he's been unelected, fortunately, who pulled the fire alarm in Congress. Well, what if he hadn't pulled the fire alarm? What if he had stood there and started yelling, fire, fire? It's the same thing. So to use that as an analogy to real speech is to defraud the public. And so shouting fire in the theater is the dumbest thing ever said by a smart man like Oliver Wendell Holmes. And because it was such a smart man, and because it's a clever phrase, by the way, he didn't invent it, he borrowed it from the brief in the case. Judges commit plagiarism all the time. More judges have plagiarized things I've written in my briefs. They don't ever give credit. They just quote them, and that's what Oliver Wendell Holmes did. But in this case, he picked the wrong quote in the wrong context. So I hope nobody ever again will use that analogy of shouting fire in a crowded theater, because it was fraudulent, it was false, and it has nothing to do with speech at all.
The free speech thing, of course, over this past decade, much made of the censorship that takes place on social media. We're all familiar with it. We know the stories.
Sure.
And of course, one of the common complaints that people will make is Facebook should be forced to, Twitter should, or X should be forced to, or forced not to, or whatever it might be. Maybe address for folks the nuances or non-nuanced difference between government and free speech, and then private non-government platforms and free speech, and what might
Sure.
or might not be acceptable.
Well, if people want to hear my views more extensively, I had a very interesting debate with Elon Musk on the internet. You can just, if you Google Alan Dershowitz, Elon Musk, or Elon Musk, Alan Dershowitz, free speech, you'll hear, and we get into that in some detail. He argued that he was completely in favor of free speech on X, and I argued that by prioritizing and putting certain speech way, way, way on the bottom of the algorithms, he was exercising a kind of censorship. There is an enormous difference between governmental censorship and private censorship, but of course, in the age of the internet, where the vast majority of people get their information online from private purveyors, the line is a thin one, and so we have to also be concerned about censorship by by the media. But you know, since the day speech was, I think it was Sigmund Freud who said civilization began when the first human being hurled an insult instead of a spear. And so from the day we have used insults, we have also had censorship. There's never been a period of time where we've had speech without also an equal claim to censorship. And of course, you have to have some censorship. There's no doubt you can't just go around defaming people. You can't go around inciting immediately people to violence. So the big issue is how to draw the line. Of course, the framers of the Bill of Rights got it wrong when they said Congress. First of all, they didn't apply it to the states. Originally, they applied it to the states, but then they took it back. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. No law? No law? Of course, you're going to make some laws. You can't give away our nuclear secrets. You can't give away our nuclear codes. There are certain things you just can't say. So the question is always going to be line drawing. And again, so my little matrix works. Better 10 bad things be said than one good thing be censored. But depending on what the bad thing is, not better that 10 nuclear codes be revealed or the names of spies who could be killed be revealed. So the ratio will always depend on context. And that's one of the things I contribute to my book.
And I urge everyone to read the book and to look for the construct at the end about the application and adjustment to the whole Blackstone's ratio and how you apply it to handling issues with the preventive state. I would be remiss if I didn't have you on in this moment in time where there's a war taking place between the administration and Harvard University, and ask for your thoughts on this, perhaps from the legality standpoint. Very quickly, my thought is it's interesting. I mean, if you have 5 companies along the bank of a river and one of the 5 is polluting, it's easy to understand an enforcement against the single company. If 5 companies are polluting, though, and you enforce against one, that seems to be a different matter. Right. And given some of Harvard's sins and given what we see elsewhere with other universities, well, I'll leave it there, and I want to hear your thoughts about
Sure.
this current ongoing battle.
Look, Harvard is doing a much better job of fighting anti-Semitism than Columbia, than NYU, and some other schools have done. President Garber has really tried his best. Harvard made a dreadful mistake. The corporation, and the same corporation is still there, they made this dreadful mistake of picking Claudine Gay to be the president of Harvard. She was Miss Political Correctness, DEI, intersectionality, all the worst things that have afflicted universities were represented by Claudine Gay, and yet she was elected to be the president. Fortunately for Harvard, she committed plagiarism and was able to be fired, and now there's a president who's very sensitive, very good, and a real scholar. But Harvard is a very complex and diverse institution, diverse in the sense that every school stands on its own bottom. They're financially independent. And so the Harvard administration can't tell the Divinity School what to do. The Divinity School is a cesspool of anti-Semitism. Tragically, in the name of Christianity, they are promoting, teaching, not just tolerating, teaching anti-Semitism. Who do you think they rewarded at the graduation? The class marshal elected by the students, tolerated by the faculty, is the man who was accused and is guilty of harassing and assaulting a Jewish student from Israel. He was supposed to be punished. Instead, he was rewarded. The same thing is true of the public health school. They claim to be interested in public health, but they define public health in a completely partisan political way. And they have become a sewer of anti-Semitism. The Harvard Law School recently gave a $65,000 scholarship to one of the people who was assaulted, a student from the law review who assaulted the Jewish student. And the $65,000 scholarship is given to him to work against Israel and to promote even more anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism by an organization called CAIR, C-A-I-R, which is very, very anti-Israel organization. So, what we're seeing is a complex situation at Harvard. And as is common, the government overreacts. They say we're going to give no student visas. No, that's not right. You can't. You shouldn't deny a student visa to a scientist from Israel, for example, or they say they'll defund cancer research. No, you should targeted defunding. You should defund the public health school. You should defund the Carr Center for Human Rights. You should defund if the Divinity School gets money, and you should keep visas from young people who come to America not to study but to make trouble. And so it's targeted defunding that's very important. I have a new book coming out with a clever title. It's called Trump to Harvard, Go Fund Yourself. And I go through all of these issues and analysis. That'll be my 58th book.
All right. Well, then we'll have to come up with a ketchup reference. We're at the end of time, but with your permission, can I keep you for a couple moments longer?
Sure.
I would just like to ask you, and this is a very personal question from me.
Sure.
So I have long been sort of an outcast from my own circles as being the, quote, conservative who's made a passionate defense of the importance of defense attorneys. I have long argued that they are the last line of defense, the Maginot line between freedom and totalitarianism. And yet, we know that conservatives tend to have this aversion to criminal defense attorneys. It's almost reflexive. And I was wondering if you might take a moment to make the compelling argument to my conservative brethren about the importance of your field.
I'm going to start by attacking liberals first. Liberals are much worse than conservatives, because conservatives say there shouldn't be defense attorneys, the guilty should get convicted. Liberals are much worse. They say, we defend the right of poor people, we defend the right of guilty people, we defend this, we defend that, but we just don't like when you represent Donald Trump. Or we don't like when you represent people from a political point of view we don't like. There was an organization called Project 65, which started all this lawfare, which threatened to disbar any lawyer who defended Donald Trump. They even came after me. I had to spend $100,000. I won all my cases, but nonetheless, people said they didn't want to be Dershowitz. So it's crucially important that both liberals and conservatives understand the role of counsel. Look, one of the most important decisions ever made by one of our founding fathers was by John Adams when he agreed to defend those accused of the Boston Massacre. You can imagine anyone less popular in the city of Boston than British redcoats who killed Crispus Attucks and a whole bunch of other people who were merely protesting British colonials. Or they threw some snowballs and all that stuff, but they were involved in a legitimate protest. And John Adams represented these people, and he did a pretty good job. He got most of them off. A couple of them were convicted of less serious offenses, and he became the second president of the United States and an author of the Declaration of Independence. Abraham Lincoln defended guilty after guilty after guilty. I have some of his briefs. Thurgood Marshall defended guilty people. Clarence Darrow, some of the great figures of American history, have defended the guilty. And let's face another reality. The vast majority of people charged with crime in America are guilty. Thank God for that. Would you want to live in a country where the majority of people were innocent? That would be Iran, that would be China, that would be Russia, but it's not the United States. And to keep it that way, our job is to vigorously, within the rules of ethics, within the rules of law, to defend everybody, whether it be Donald Trump or some obscure person. Most of my cases are pro bono. Most of my cases are people you've never heard of. But when I do a high visibility case like Trump or like O.J. Simpson, or like Klaus von Bülow or Julian Assange, people get very, very upset. Take Julian Assange, for example. I hate the son of a bitch. He is anti-Israel. He's anti-American. I think he's a despicable human being. And I spent so much of my time defending his rights under the First Amendment, pro bono, without a fee. I don't like him. I just wrote him a note and telling him how much I disliked him. And that's been true of many of my clients. So don't engage in McCarthyism. Don't associate the lawyer with the client. Associate the lawyer with the constitutional rights. The same thing is true of other people I've defended over the years. I have not been their friends. In the Trump case, I voted against Trump when I defended him. I supported his opponent, but I didn't think it was constitutional to impeach him on the grounds that Congress impeached him on. So I'm very proud of my representation. And I think, by the way, conservatives are beginning to be persuaded by you and others. I think they're moving more in the direction of understanding the role of counsel as conservatives get victimized more by lawfare.
Yeah, it's interesting. In 2019, I had a national conservative figure call me one evening, and I answered the phone, and he said, "I owe you an apology." And I said, "For what?" And he said, "I'm watching what's been happening with Trump. I know what you've always said about criminal defense lawyers. I've always argued with you. I think you're right. I'm sorry." And so that incident brought
You've
that
changed
person
minds.
around.
That's great. That's the greatest compliment anybody can be paid. We helped change somebody's mind.
That's right. I agree with that. So, Professor Dershowitz, tell everyone where to get this must-read book.
Well, it's Amazon. It's a bestseller on a limited number of subjects, like, I don't know, politics or something like that. But because the New York Times won't review it, they reviewed all of my books before I defended Trump, but they won't review any of my books since I defended Trump. You have to make a statement by going online and getting it from Amazon and spending the $20 and reading it, and write to me if you don't like it or if you're critical of anything. But the Preventive State, Amazon.com. And thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. You're a great interviewer, and you asked some absolutely wonderful and probing questions. So thank you.
Well, that's very kind. That is a high praise for me from you, as somebody who goes back to college when they read your first book.
Thank you.
So that's a long time ago, by the way. Professor Alan Dershowitz, everybody, thanks to you. Thanks to the Freedom Chamber for sponsoring today's broadcast. This was an absolute pleasure. So thanks so much and good luck with the book. I was sent a free copy, by the way, by your PR person. I am going to buy one just to show support.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
The old cliche, there is strength in numbers, is very true. You can be a small mom and pop company, and maybe you by yourself can't really swing anything, but put together, I don't know, 20,000 mom and pop companies? Now that could do something right there.
Business owners, it is time to connect, unite, and show our strength in numbers. We need to unite our voices and fight back. My company is proud to be a founding member of the Freedom Chamber, the pro-American business network. Join today at freedomchamber.net.